Thank you for that, and thank you and congratulations to Tanda for putting on this event. I started my life in payroll 26 years ago for what would be called now a workforce management company. We did time and attendance, and it was back in the day where you had Bundy cards and you'd take up a thing that looked like a credit card and you'd swipe that was the latest technology. So it always feels like coming back to these workforce events, it always feels like coming home to me. Right now, the payroll industry, as Rod just said, is in a bit of flux. It's been a shocking day. It's been a shocking week. It's been a fairly shocking month even. I sat down the other day when I was putting this together and I thought, how many headlines have we really seen this month about mainly underpayments? We've had, Michael Hill was recently in the press. The same day, the Shangri-La in Sydney decided to come out and say they'd underpaid $250,000 to their staff. Now we've got people suing Rockpool, former staff actually suing the group. Just yesterday, I think it was, Fair Work have come out and said that Indota Spa operator has been deducting funds from fortnightly 457 visa holders completely illegally. I actually forgot who this one was because it doesn't have the name, but there's another one. Someone in Melbourne had no records or false records. Sushi operators seem to do this a lot. So we've got a lot of fast food in the press as well. The big one this year, and this was just a still again from only a couple of months ago, is the super retail group, the Rebel Sport underpayment. The CEO had already told the market that he was going to leave, but he left early because of this. This was from yesterday's Sydney Morning Herald. The government are now coming out to say they're putting legislation together where there'll actually be criminal charges that will be able to be brought against, we're not sure who yet, presumably at least directors. And today, this is hot off the press. Literally, I was sitting, having looked through my presentation, remembering what I was going to talk about, and I had to redo it because I found MJ Bail today at 11 minutes past midday while you were probably having your lunch or thinking about lunch, have come out and said that now they have an underpayment problem which goes back some years. And I can go on and on and on and on. And really interestingly, the thing that amuses me but kind of annoys me the most is they always blame the same thing. And the thing that they always blame is the system. I don't know what this system is, but it's always to blame. In this MJ Bail article in the Fin Review today, they're talking about the complexity of the retail award and how it needs to be overhauled. But I know a heap of retailers who are doing a great job at this, so it can be done. So, we're at a workforce conference. I can't imagine this guy's come up today. It's been the latest one, I think. I was actually caught up with Natalie James yesterday. She's the former Fair Work Ombudsman, and we were having a laugh about the timing of the Fair Work enforceable undertaking against George Columbaris's business. It's in its second week of press now because, of course, it was the final week of MasterChef, and then there was the next news was about them, not wanting a 40% pay rise, and Channel 10 didn't give it. And my inbox this week has been full of this sort of stuff. And I can't get any work done. People send me this stuff and it just clogs up my inbox. But again, the conversations are always around who's responsible. I've seen a lot of commentary about poor old George, like he's a celebrity chef. Why are we picking on him? But at the end of the day, someone has to take responsibility. And we're always looking, and I think media commentators are always looking to who's responsible. In terms of people in the room, have we got any company directors in the room? Okay, so you guys are all on the hook, completely on the hook. We all know that. You've probably all done the company directors course, and you know that you've got a fiduciary responsibility and all that good stuff. Any senior management in the room, or in fact management in the room? Okay, you guys are what we call alternate directors. You're also on the hook, even though you don't, your name's not with ASIC as a director. There have been prosecutions based on senior management acting as what's called an alternate director. And any payroll managers, HR managers in the room, okay, you'll know about Section 550 of the Fair Work Act. There's an accessorial liability provision, whereas if you knowingly underpay or if you knowingly incorrectly pay people, you're on the hook as well. So we're all on the hook. It's actually all of our responsibility. And I think I'm going to lose the will to live if I hear the system blamed again. And I guess what I was asked to do today is come and talk to you about how to make sure, and the sad thing is that you wouldn't be here if you didn't care about getting your payroll right. It's actually the people who aren't here who are the problem, but hopefully that I'll be able to give you some information and you'll be able to go to your next dinner party and you'll be able to tell all your friends that aren't here what they actually need to do to make sure that they're not the next headline in the Courier Mail or the AFR. So what can we actually do to stop this happening, or to at least find out if it is happening and then and finish stop the problem? There is really 3 areas, and I talk about these a lot. The first one is processes. The actual payroll process is often broken. And I don't have a photo, but it was fairly well recorded in the press last year. There was a big retailer, which I can't really technically talk about because I've signed a piece of paper saying I won't, but they had 200,000 paper timesheets that they had to work out back pays from. And those 200,000 timesheets were in my office for about 5 months. And I actually took a photo of them because I wanted to remember what 200,000 timesheets looks like, and it would fill the stage in boxes. That's a bad process. And one of the things that we want to look at when we do a process review is, what are you doing that you can stop doing? There are things, sometimes I walk into a pay office and the payroll manager will describe the process to me, and they're so busy getting the pays out that no one really takes the time to think, what could we actually do to improve this process? What are we doing that we could actually stop that would make no difference to the process at all? What is complex that we do now that we could simplify? The amount of sort of what we call in payroll land workarounds or Excel spreadsheets used. My favourite is the sticky notepad. I can walk into a pay office and pretty much get a feel as to what their process is like just by looking at their computer or the desks surrounding the computer as to how many sticky notepads are there. Gives a real indication of what the payroll process is like. And what can we automate? Again, oftentimes I go into organisations, and even if there is some semi-automation, there's manual checking of it. So we just need to stand back and look at the process and think about what is it that you're automating and why aren't you believing that that's correct? Oftentimes I'll see payroll teams spend more time on the checking of an automated process than they could actually be sort of running really useful reports that could feed back into the business. Payroll sometimes makes me feel like that too. And the other thing that's really often lacking in a pay office is documentation of that process. Probably at least a handful of times a week I'll talk to people who say they need someone, they're in trouble for something in terms of, they've lost their payroll manager or they've gone on sick leave with no notice, and they just need someone to come and get the pays done, but there's no documentation. A friend of mine a couple of years ago was working at a payroll outsourcing vendor, and he did send me a photo of, he asked for a handover from the outgoing payroll operator to him of a client's payroll process, and this is what he got. No kidding, that is a real document. I won't tell you where it's from, but that is actually a real handover document for a payroll process. It's the first time I've ever used it publicly, but so I better get off it before someone takes a photo of it. I'll get in trouble. But in terms of process, that's the first thing to look at. I figured that if I could just leave you one kind of nugget of gold on each thing, you might be able to take that back to your organisation and improve the compliance and the optimisation of your payroll process. And in terms of processing, it's governance and controls. Don't ask me why a monkey hanging onto a sack of money for some reason reminds me that it's governance and controls. It just is. But it's actually locking down your process so things can't go wrong. So I always look at a process as something I'm trying to break. So get someone like me, or someone like someone in your finance team, or someone in your HR team, or whoever you can, even someone in IT, often good at breaking processes, and ask them, go through the process with them and see where they can find the holes. Where are things being, requiring approvals that aren't getting approved? What's happening to physical documentation? Where's it being held? What is not able to be justified? So a really good example of that is a water cooler conversation where a manager says, "Oh, Freddie worked 3 hours of overtime on Saturday. Can you just sort that out through the pay office?" To actually make a change in payroll based on a water cooler conversation is not a good process. And might I say, when we see process and lack of governance and controls which cause underpayments, we often read about that in the papers. The payroll audits we do, at least half of them, in fact more than half of them, we actually find overpayments. And the reason is because you identify underpayments often because staff are telling you that they've been underpaid. So it's actually quite a surprise to organisations when they think they've got a payroll problem and we find overpayments. We did some work with a fairly large, about 2,000 employee charity based in Melbourne a couple of weeks ago, and we found just with the way that they were paying, I think it was leave loading, for an 8-month period they'd overpaid $1 million. So some of these, the big underpayments are shocking, but the big overpayments can be just as shocking. Made the fee seem very cheap as well, which was nice. The next one is people. These are actually real people. They're people I work with. It's really, really important to find good people, and it's really also really, really hard to find good people in payroll, because how do you know? I was having this conversation with a client yesterday. How do you know that they're good? Well, you don't until they've been with you probably about 6 months, and then you'll either know if they're good or they're not good, and if they're not good, it can be a problem. So one of the things we, people in payroll are hard to find, first of all, because the good ones are being retained by their employers. They're not on seek looking for jobs. And the other thing is, people employing payroll people, so often internal recruiters or financial controllers or HR staff, don't actually know how to recognise good payroll people, and it makes it very difficult. One of the things that we do quite a lot of is suggest our clients do a payroll knowledge assessment, because it's one tangible way that you can understand what the actual knowledge of that individual is. It doesn't help you figure out whether they're going to be a good cultural fit, or if they've got industry experience, for example, but it will actually give you an indication of what base payroll knowledge that they've got. Excuse me. One of the worst reasons to employ a payroll person is this one. And we've got this is from our website, it's a sort of a common mistakes document, and the first one is the one that we absolutely detest the most. If I see a payroll ad saying, you must have, insert name of payroll system here, experience, it drives me bonkers, because the tool has got nothing to do with the underlying knowledge, and this really is part of the key of these payroll scandals. It's if you're taking people who don't have the actual knowledge and relying too much on the system, how do we even know it's wrong? Who's checking it? Someone called me yesterday. They had 85 employees. Excuse me. They have 85 employees, and she needed to get a new payroll person, and it was a sort of a part-time kind of job, and she was asking me about the payroll knowledge assessment. She said, really, we outsource to a payroll outsourcing company, and they're just going to do all this for us. And I said, even if that were true, even if that payroll outsourcing company had all the knowledge that they needed to run a compliant payroll for you, if you don't have anyone who has the knowledge of how to check that payroll, how are you ever going to know that they're actually doing a good job and they are actually running a compliant payroll? I had about a 20-minute debate with this HR manager about why she did or did not need payroll expertise in-house. But yeah, having a system-based recruitment strategy is typically not a great idea. The big one in payroll that I talk about all the time is payroll qualifications. So there's about 10% of those who work in payroll who have competency-based payroll qualifications, either a certificate in payroll administration or diploma of payroll. So there's 90% of people that don't. So that's growing every year, but it's a slow burn, and it's actually hard to change an industry's knowledge base. But we are seeing real results from those employers who are investing in their teams and getting them qualified. Even if you do have qualified staff, and even if you don't, it's like sometimes not everyone has to, I know some great payroll managers who don't have qualifications, but it's really key to continually train your teams. And I don't mean training on what payroll's about, it's just keeping up to date with, with the latest legislation. And what we find is that, I think someone was saying earlier that, it was in the other room, saying that about STP, not only is there a really large percentage of organisations that don't know about it, there's a percentage of organisations that do know about it, small businesses, who say, yeah, but it doesn't apply to me. So just to keep up to date with things like that is really, really important. Awards change all the time. People think an award is a static thing, but it changes all the time. You can't just rely on, your award interpretation system to just always assume that it's doing the most, the making those changes. Someone actually needs to be checking the stuff, so they need to be well trained. And in terms of the thing that can probably, the cheapest and easiest and most effective way that you can support your payroll team is actually just give them some support, because there's no way that someone can run your payroll and know everything that they need to know about payroll and continually keep track of all the changes and run the pays at the same time. It's just impossible. So, we support about, 1,000 or 1,500, I'm not exactly sure, number of employers. And it's, you can do all this yourself. You can get on the Fair Work website, you can get on the Tax Office website, on the Office of State Revenue websites, and get all the information yourself. Or you can just, there's us, there's TAPS, there's a handful of others. You can just get some support. And it's not an expensive thing to do, but it's often saved a lot of employers a lot of money. So in terms of, the other thing that's to think about is when you call the tax office. My favourite is actually when you call Fair Work, because you can call Fair Work 3 times and get 3 different answers. Tax office is a little bit the same. Gee, there's no one from Fair Work or Tax Office in here, I think I should have checked that. I have set up a discount code if anyone isn't a member of Australian Payroll Association and wants to be. If you use TANDA in the coupon code, it'll reduce the price by 15% until the end of August if you're interested. And the third really important thing to think about when you're running a compliant payroll is platforms, not funky shoes. And I mean technology platforms. And I used to call this just technology, but it's actually how the technology works together. So, and the most important thing to think of here is not just does the technology support your process is it serving you as an organisation. It's how it all fits together and what the employee experience is. Yeah, and I was talking to a client this week about changing some technology, some payroll technology, and the one thing that was important to her was that what the employee experience felt like. And from an HR point of view, this is really important, because if it's frustrating, that interface between the employee and the employer, it just can give a lack of trust. And if you get a lack of trust between employees and employers, it's just never a good thing. And you've actually got sort of some rotting culture there ultimately. I do like this. I do like this quote by Steve Wozniak. He's the co-founder of Apple, and I think he was probably talking about the change between. He was probably referring to laptops and desktops and things. But it always reminds me, because when I think about organisations that have invested in technology that supports the payroll function, it's like you'll never throw it out. I don't know if anyone comes to an organisation like this. I did some work with quite a large hospitality client in Sydney a couple of months ago, and they had some old technology and they wanted to do some other things, and really what would have been great is if they just threw it all out and started again. But they just wanted to hang on to this old technology, and in fact actually TANDA won the business, so good luck guys in getting this one sorted. If maybe you guys can help get rid of this old tech. So now they want TANDA, which is kind of new, great technology to work with this kind of old technology. And I just think we should be, we need to more be holistically thinking about what are we trying to get done. What's the engagement going to be like with the employees? Is there going to be friction? And not, because otherwise you just get this sort of odd sort of technology stack that's all becomes a bit bitsy and a bit ugly. So I just think never be afraid to level the playing field and say what actually would serve us. An example of that, this is a blurry photo of a finger scan machine. Does anyone do biometric finger scannings at their workforce? No one? No one uses these. Okay, cool. I don't particularly like them. I've got a client, they're a hospitality client, national client, and I was asking them this exact question about whether their technology was supporting them. And they said, oh yeah, we've got these finger scan devices, and in the pay office they thought that was fine, and actually they knew that sometimes people forgot to use the finger scans as they came and left work. And I thought that was a bit weird, because back in the day when I first started working in this industry with time and attendance with my swipe cards, it was quite unusual for people not to swipe. In fact, the thing back then was stopping your mate swiping for someone else. That was the big problem then. You can't do that with a finger scan. But when I actually went on site and had a look at how these kitchens were working, what you'd find is because chefs are in a sort of a wet environment and it was affecting their fingers, so it was taking ages for this finger scan machine to record their finger. And then what would happen is the head chef would walk in. There'd been 20 chefs lined up to use this finger scan machine. Head chef knows that he's got, 300 people for lunch, and he'd just say, get out of there and just get into the kitchen and start, chopping onions or whatever chefs do in the morning. So it wasn't actually that the process wasn't working, it's just the technology wasn't serving them because it was just the wrong technology for them. And it was that really basic thing was causing havoc in the pay office, but no one actually thought to go down to the kitchen. Something I'm seeing a lot at the moment is the ability to use GPS and mobile devices in our industry. Again, this client that is in Sydney that's just implementing Tanda had an issue with some remote workforces, and they wanted people to be able to clock in at these remote workforces. They didn't want to have finger scanning machines or whatever at all these remote workforces. But the solution came about because you can use some GPS technology on your mobile phone that only allows you to clock in when you're in a particular area. So that just does away with any of the need for actual devices on the walls, especially if they're not your walls. The thing that a lot of our clients are using now, I have a small interest in a payroll outsourcing company, and what they're using a lot is facial recognition technology. So this is completely frictionless. You just go and look at an iPad. So again, the technology is changing all the time, and we're seeing some really good results. And in fact, it's really interesting that no one in the room uses finger scanning, because only 2 years ago that was the latest kind of thing. So in terms of the actual platforms, the absolute biggest risk to your payroll compliance, and I can tell you it's the reason that every single one of those headlines happened, or a contributing reason at least, is that there's the set and forget mentality. And in fact, Natalie James calls it set and neglect, which I thought was quite nice as well. And it's when you set up your systems, whether that be your rostering or time and attendance or payroll system, an award interpretation system once, and you never look at it again. And the chances are this becomes a snowballing effect, because probably the person that made the decisions on how it was set up was an unqualified payroll person who didn't actually know how the award was interpreted. Gee, the award's probably changed 3 or 4 times since then anyway, and no one's been checking it. And every single one of those big underpayment scandal stories happens because it's a small error over a large employee population over a long period of time. And that's how you get $43 million at Rebel Sport. That's how you get, George Columbaris, I think it was averages about $15,000 an employee. Like, that's a lot of money if you're a hospitality worker. So this set and forget thing, if there was one thing that I could change about the industry, that would be it, to stop that. But the reality is employers just think if the platform's not broken, if it's not on fire, I don't need to invest in it. And for me, that's the biggest mistake you can make. Like I said, at least half of the audits that we do, we find overpayments. So this is the perfect storm. It's that unqualified payroll person dealing with some manual processes that really could be automated or stopped or simplified, and platforms that just aren't serving you. They're the three things. And if I could leave you with only three things that if you did, you would make a huge difference in your ability to really lie in bed at night and tell your directors, not with your directors, but you're lying happily in bed at night and your directors are also doing the same because your payroll is safe, it would be get support for your payroll team or whoever does your payroll, especially if it's a small business where you might have someone who does payroll. They might also do the accounting function or the HR function, or it could even be, the owner. These are typically not people who know huge amounts about the payroll function. Test the governance and controls. Don't just say, our payroll function's fine, but actually test it. We don't have time to talk about a disaster recovery story. Some of you might have heard me talking about it before, but if you can just decide to test it like it was a disaster, or if someone brand new came in, could they actually run your pay? And that set and forget mentality. We need to be able to test the payroll outputs regularly and by someone who knows what they're looking for. It's no point just signing off payrolls when you're not actually knowing what you're looking for. If you want to get hold of me, feel free to drop me a line. I've had the wrap-up warning, I think. And I've got maybe a couple of minutes for questions if anyone has any particular questions on compliance or any other sort of payroll topic. Don't ask me how to tax determination pay, though. That won't be me.
Thanks very much, Tracy.
No trouble.